entire luster, their entire halo, or their glow out of conquests that had come up until then were just totally lost. And bin Laden, who was already in Kandahar, basically went to Mullah Omar. I'm told this, and I have the story from a Pakistani journalist who got it from bin Laden, and offered his services. He told them they didn't know how to run a war, they didn't know how to organize their forces, didn't know who was on the other side, and how to fight. And bin Laden said, I do, because I've helped defeat the Russians, I've got this record, and he was a legend in his own mind, a self-promoter to the very hilt. And the Taliban were eager for guidance and support. So he not only helped them restructure their forces through one of his deputies, but he also helped them devise a strategy for conquest of the North. And he opened his own checkbook, or got other people to open their checkbooks, and helped finance what would be the offensive of 1998. 1998 in Mazar was a total conquest by the Taliban. This time around, they were ready for next to everything. They had not only bought the various warlords along the way, but they were really ready to kill when they got there. And they put a man in charge named Mullah Niazi. I think he came from Herat, and he was the governor of Mazar-e-Sharif. And this man, on day one, declared that any Sunni had a right to kill any Shiite. And this meant civilians in the streets. That Shiites had to convert. And they would put a test. They would actually test Shiites. As you know, there's a difference between in the rituals, in the litany of the Islamic prayers, and they would test Shiites and ask them to recite the prayers. And if they didn't have the right number of verses, they were killed. Now, how many people were killed in the streets, we don't really know to this day, but it is at least a couple of thousand. On the whole, what they did was they waited for Shiites, for Hazara, even though the year before it was Uzbeks who had trapped them and killed them and suffocated their people. Now, that was one thing that happened. It was early August of 1998 that this happened. Several other things happened the same day, and this is probably the reason why it never got coverage it deserved. The day before, 2 days before, two attacks occurred on U.S. embassies in East Africa. One was in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, one was in Nairobi, Kenya. As you may remember, thousands of people were hurt. 200 and something killed, at least a dozen Americans among them. And it came out of nowhere. Well, it didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, actually, the CIA or the NSA were monitoring communications, and they discovered rather quickly that the lines went back to bin Laden, and that bin Laden was in Afghanistan. The other thing that happened right at that time, just after the conquest of Mazar, was that a group of Pakistani extremists, supported by the Taliban, marched into the Iranian. The Iranians had a consulate in Mazar. And I think it was probably because they were very worried about the Taliban conquering Mazar, and they were probably helping funnel support to certainly to the Hazara, the Shiites, and also to others in the north. And I think that they had support, the Iranians did, maybe even from the Uzbeks and from a lot of other people in the neighboring countries who were worried about the Taliban and their form of rule taking over. So this group marches into the Iranian consulate, lines up all of the staff, and then shoots them dead. Now, two of them actually survived, because just by falling over dead, and they escaped, and they got back to Iran within about 2 or 3 weeks. That was a month, on foot. The city was totally locked down. But this almost led to war between Iran and Afghanistan. The Iranian government was livid. The Taliban refused to say what had happened. They were really responsible. And these people, whether they were working for some secret for intelligence or not, they were still credited as diplomats, and you just can't shoot them and then pretend that they're not there. So you nearly had war. So of those three things that occurred right around the same time in early August of 1998, two became pretty well known. Bin Laden's attacks on the two embassies and the attack on the Iranian consulate. The third thing, which is only in a sense the biggest thing in Afghan history, was the conquest of Mazar with an immense and organized atrocity directed by the Taliban. So where does bin Laden fit into this, and where does the story basically, why am I telling you the story? Well, it's because from that moment on, the Americans had one aim under the Clinton administration, and that was to get hold of bin Laden. They knew he was responsible. They wanted to kill him. They wanted to end his operations. And you know, in mid-August, in fact, Clinton decided in the middle of the night to make a cruise missile attack on one of the camps of bin Laden in Afghanistan, and also against the pharmaceutical factory in Sudan. The assumption being that this factory was somehow involved and connected with bin Laden. And in both cases, he missed the right target. The pharmaceutical factory had no connection with bin Laden, a point that some people in the administration still don't admit. And bin Laden was not at the camp. He took a different turn that day. He just decided to go to Kabul instead of to the camp. Everybody apparently in most of Afghanistan, certainly the foreign correspondents, the diplomatic corps, everybody knew that the Americans were about to attack. In Pakistan, the entire government knew, the ISID knew. You know, there was just no secret because the Americans had basically told people to evacuate. So, you know, bin Laden had plenty of warning. And the whole notion that you can actually decapitate a movement by killing one man, and that you're going to be able to hit him with a cruise missile is so far-fetched that you just wonder how they could have come up with this as an operational plan. But they did. So the most interesting thing was, at that moment, the Americans demanded bin Laden's handover. And at that moment, Mullah Omar took to the radio. This is even before the attack in August of 98. And he declared, "We will never hand over bin Laden. He fought with us in the resistance. He is a good Muslim. He's from the land of the two holy places. He's a Saudi. He's our friend. We are not going to let him go." And he said this on the radio. It was a very firm statement. Nevertheless, for the next 6 months, the Clinton administration organized a big diplomatic push to beg the Taliban essentially to hand over bin Laden. By the end of the push, which was really early 1999, Mullah Omar, well, you know, they just kept on sending messages to him. They would send somebody to Islamabad to talk to the Taliban officials, and the official would say nothing, but then Mullah Omar would make an utterance on the radio. And his last utterance was, and I'm going to paraphrase it, it was a very moving one in a sense, and it was, you know, total commitment. He basically said, half our country has been destroyed by the wars of the last 20 years, and I would willingly let the second half, the rest of the country, be destroyed rather than hand over our guest bin Laden. So by that point, that's the point that I would say, if you have any doubts, that's when the hijacking occurred. Bin Laden had built up such an IOU, if you know what I mean, from the Taliban. They owed him so much because they had conquered Mazar with his help. They were on the way to taking over the entire country. Mosul still had about 15% of the territory, and there was some resistance in the central part of the country. But basically, Omar made it totally clear that there was no giving over of bin Laden. And as I said, my feeling is that if we had covered the war as journalists, we might have seen what was happening and how bin Laden actually had played this role. Now, the Clinton administration did not change course in a serious way. They recognized in a way that bin Laden had this role and that he was inseparable from the Taliban. And they decided to impose economic sanctions on Afghanistan. And then they went to the United Nations to get the rest